Today we're going to prime the pump a little bit. I've been asked to give a 5-minute, and only 5-minute overview. It will be 5 minutes. Let's go. So Kelly is the founding editor. He likes to ask in his TED Talks, what is technology? Sometimes he asks what technology wants, but that's a really deep thing when technology wants something. So we're going to focus on the first question instead. What is technology? We all have a sense for what that is. It changes over time. We've got the printing press. We've got the water frame that led to manufacturing. We've got cars. We've got the first televisions. These are all things that sort of change society. This is the class I teach, by the way, Technology and Society. That's why I'm here today. The iPhone in 2007, the World War I, they all changed things. The class focuses on these major revolutions: scientific revolution, industrial revolution, and whatever it is we're living in now. What are we living in now? And so we look at the sort of TED Talks and news to try and figure out what that revolution is. Looking at Google Ngrams to try and figure out what we say. People often call it information revolution, but I argue that that's not it. We don't get to name our own revolution. Our revolution will be named 100 years from now. So we can try to figure it out. We can say, yes, technology is getting better, that the computer chips are all getting faster and faster, and so Moore's law suggests that things are going to change faster than we can predict. Some people say Moore's law is slowing down, but in reality, our technology is still going to get better even if technically it doesn't. Ray Kurzweil suggests that the end of the world is near, the singularity is near, that society will get so fast, so quick, human brains won't be able to keep up, we'll need to completely change. But today, I'm going to focus on a lower version of that. What happens to towns when jobs go away? Because experts are predicting somewhere between 30 to 50% of the current jobs we have today will be replaced by automation within the next 20 to 40 years. That's a lot of jobs. We've seen those kind of jobs change over the course of history. Like, we all used to be farmers. I literally used to be a farmer, but we all used to be farmers. But if we change society slow enough, we can sort of adapt. And now, most of us are working in service, had factory jobs for a while. Even those small-scale factory jobs are going away because the robots that work in factories are getting cheaper. Here's Baxter and his little brother Sawyer. Those cost about half of one employee's salary for a year. They're general-purpose factory robots that you can buy and just teach it to do by moving it around. We're familiar with the robots are already replacing things at Costco and Lowe's, that these things are already replacing the cashiers. And guess what? Our kid will prefer the robotic cashier to the human cashier because they like screens. That's assuming that they even go to a store. We're doing much more, exponentially increasing our sales at Amazon. I'm scaling this so it matches a little bit more. So Walmart's still taking a big chunk of it, but if you start buying from Amazon, maybe you would think that driving jobs and delivery jobs would go up. But guess what? Those driving jobs are going to be placed by robots too. Looking at the Times News this weekend, nearly all the jobs that were posted were driving jobs, and we've got robotic cars on the streets today that will fulfill those instead. Things that might be safe, healthcare. Like if you're being touched in your teeth or your back or something like that, you want a human doing that and not a robot messing around inside your mouth. But a lot of the jobs, including probably most of us here, probably mine, are going to be replaced. Why? CGP Grey posts a lot of great videos. He's a physicist as well. He suggests humans need not apply. It's 15 minutes, and I only have 5, so you have to go watch his video. His argument is that artificial intelligence, which we've seen Watson beat our best Jeopardy champions, artificial intelligence is going to get better, faster, and faster, such that it can replace the jobs that required brain power. That the Industrial Revolution replaced brawn, computers will replace brains. We've seen computers beat AlphaGo just this week. This is my former student who wrote this nice article about how the computers don't even need human games to learn from. The computers can learn from themselves now and beat the best games. If you want to survive, you have to either build robots, be a cyborg, or be better at working with humans than robots are. Just slightly better. So when I say cyborg, I mean you have to be better at working with computers than other people. That at a 2005 chess tournament, 2 kind of rookie chess players with a really good computer, really good at working with computers, were better than grandmasters working with great computers, that symbiotic relationship. We tend to think that being man and machine is evil. We've had that from Frankenstein up to Darth Vader. But we're changing that. In pop culture, Iron Man and Star Wars, and even this set of artificial limbs for children is suggesting that it's okay to be part machine. And we're all doing that with our iPhones, with our iWatches, with maybe eyeglasses that will all be kind of machine-ish, or at least connected in the internet, within the very near future. We're already, and I try and convince my students, we're already part cyborg just with our smartphones. The most weird thing is to think that when all of this finally goes down and all those jobs goes away, maybe we won't need jobs. That Elon Musk, no relation to the school, along with several others, suggest that we'll probably have to incorporate basic income at some point, because if half the population doesn't have a job, who's going to buy the stuff that we're making? Which leads us to a lifetime much like in WALL-E, where we're living in what is called the sofalarity, where we just buy things and sit on our sofa and drink and watch fads. What will that be like? If we look at unemployed people now, and 147 women without jobs spent that time doing housework and caring. Guys tended to watch TV and play video games. So maybe that's our future in this post-work world. In fact, maybe in that post-work world, we'll be playing Job Simulator. This exists today. I just played it. I put on a VR headset where I played a convenience store manager. I played an office clerk. That's our games now, is doing that. So my words of wisdom for future students is you have to be really good at working with humans, really good at working with robots, or become a cyborg. If you do one of those three things, you will be able to work.
I bet you all are still laughing at that baby getting punched by the robotic arm. We're not quite there yet in healthcare, folks. I can tell you that much. So good evening. Welcome to the first I'm in the school communications, so I say communications a lot. But this is the Community Connections panel. It's the first one of the 2017-18 school year. My name's William Moner, and I'm a professor in interactive media, an assistant professor in interactive media and communications here at Elon. And to my left is Roland Roberts. He is an instructor at Alamance Community College. And we have Drew Simshaw. He is a faculty fellow and a lawyer, and he's with the Elon School of Law. So our forum tonight will address the following prompt: how is technology creating a new American workplace and workforce? And the prompt continues: although once thought the stuff of science fiction, people are being replaced by computers in many areas of our lives. Our panel tonight will address how artificial intelligence, automation, and robots are influencing how we work and live. So I'm happy to report that none of the speakers were chosen via artificial intelligence or automation, or at least that's what we would have you think. But it turns out that automation may have killed our audience. I'm not really sure what's happening here. I think a lot of the students in the second half of the semester are kind of overcommitted. There are a lot of things going on campus. The weather is conspiring against us, I think, as well. So maybe the robots know that we're talking about them, and they want to keep people away. So before we begin, I would like to thank a few people. First off, I'd like to thank Naima Clark for organizing this panel. She is the Faculty Fellow for Civic Engagement, and I'd like to thank Tony Kreider for the rousing introduction. And of course, we'd like to thank our sponsors, the Burlington Times-News, especially editor Rich Jackson, and former editor Madison Taylor, and also Elon University, who has provided this wonderful space and has provided refreshments out the door once we have finished here, so that you can continue the conversation out there. So we're in an intimate group tonight, so I welcome your questions. There are microphones positioned to either side of the aisle, and you're welcome to come up and ask questions. But we'll start with a couple of opening questions for the folks. Let me first give you a better introduction to our two gentlemen here. So first, Roland Roberts. He is an instructor in mechatronics engineering technology at Alamance Community College. He graduated from Bucknell with a BS in electrical engineering. He has a master's in computer integrated manufacturing technology from Brigham Young and a law degree from Capital University Law School. I'm outmanned on the lawyer count 2-1 here. He's licensed to practice law in North Carolina and worked for one company under the following names: Western Electric, AT&T, Lucent Technologies, and Alcatel-Lucent, and now his retirement comes from? Nokia, yeah. So the same company, 5 names, and that kind of tells you a bit about how the technology industry works from at least the industry side. He began teaching in 2009 at Piedmont Community College.
Actually, I started in 2008 at the now defunct ITT Tech.
Okay.
But I was there for 2 years and then moved to Piedmont.
Very good, and now is at Alamance Community College. Drew Simshaw is a legal method and communication fellow at the Elon University School of Law. Previously taught at Georgetown. In the Communications and Technology Law Clinic, served as a staff attorney with the Institute for Public Representation, advocating for public interest organizations. He publishes work in the area of communications and technology law, focusing on regulation of emerging technologies and their ethical implications. He recently published work on the regulation of healthcare robots, the ones that Tony said weren't coming, are coming, and on fair information practices regarding consumer cloud robotics. He has a BA from University of Washington, a JD from Indiana University Maurer School of Law, and will earn his Lugum Magister from Georgetown Law this fall. Did I get all that?
Yeah.
All right, perfect, thank you. So let's get started. First, Roland, what is mechatronics?
Well, I think that's a question that everybody asks because nobody really knows because it's a new buzzword. But essentially, it's really just a combination of a couple of existing technologies. It's a combination of electrical, mechanical, and computer technology. And if I had to sum it up in an easy word, or a very, very short word, I'd just say flexible automation. But from a standpoint of somebody who works in that, you have to have a background in all 3 rather than be specialized in one of those areas. Because you can't get away from working with computers in automation, can't get away from working with electronics in automation, and you can't get away from working with mechanical stuff in automation. So that's why it all comes together in something called mechatronics.
Okay, very good. And to Drew, so what are the things that you're seeing with regard to regulation currently, with regard to robotics?
Yeah, so I've looked at the role of artificial intelligence and automation in some industries that have sort of fallen into this dichotomy of blue-collar versus white-collar jobs, with the conventional wisdom being that blue-collar jobs are at risk because they are more prone to automation, and white-collar jobs are, I guess, safer because they require certain types of skills that just aren't going to be able to be replaced. So, well, I think there's largely some things that are helpful about that dichotomy, because I think traditional blue-collar jobs do face some unique challenges, and other white-collar jobs will be affected by AI, but maybe not replaced in the same way. But trying to find some unique challenges and opportunities within each of those sectors. So not just the 2, but looking at healthcare robots, looking at artificial intelligence in the practice of law, and identifying what those industries' unique ethics guidelines, how those are going to be affected by the role of artificial intelligence, which is new and different. Happy to go into some more specifics, unless we want to.
You're on a roll. Let's go.
Okay. But I mean, so I think what's really important in sort of, I guess, framing the discussion, though, is sort of identifying what's the goal of artificial intelligence within a given industry, and one of the concerns, I think, going forward will be what's the role of efficiency? Is efficiency and ends? Is that what we're working toward, or is that a means for some other goals? Is efficiency a means to achieve greater access for services that are taking advantage of artificial intelligence? Is efficiency a means for improving the quality of those services? Or is efficiency just a goal in itself to increase profits, to let us work at home more? What is our overall goal? So as we as we sort of expand beyond just the broad generalizations of certain jobs that will or won't be affected, I think it's important to look at opportunities and challenges within each of those sectors. So in looking at healthcare, for example, I think it's correct to say that we're not going to have doctor robots working around anytime soon. And when they do, they won't just sort of pop off the shelves. This will have been a slow sort of evolution, maybe starting with robotic surgery, or maybe having some custodial robots that perform sort of the more remedial tasks around the hospital and free up nurses to do that human side of healthcare that people rely on. But when you look at things like diagnosing people, that's something that artificial intelligence is getting really good at, finding connections and not even necessarily asking why certain symptoms can be diagnosed the way that they are, but just appreciating the fact that they are, and they can be, and that we can treat illnesses as a result of that. The challenge, I think, in the healthcare setting, though, is going to be that what we call the workplace is changing in healthcare. The workplace is not just going to be traditional hospitals as things continue to advance. There are going to be more devices that are available in the home that allow for home health care, that allow for telemedicine. So what we consider the traditional healthcare space is going to change. And from a regulatory oversight for concerns then that will arise because of this, when you think about people caring about their privacy, when people care about the safety of the devices that they're using, it's going to be a nightmare in terms of regulating this. You'll have the Food and Drug Administration continue to review these increasingly autonomous devices as medical devices, but reviewing them pretty much just for safety. They'll care about things like cybersecurity and whether these robots could be hacked, but really only from a functionality standpoint, with the goal being keep these things working without having them hurt you physically. Other concerns like privacy, I think everyone just turns to the regulation HIPAA enforced by the Health and Human Services Department, which of course only covers doctors and insurance companies, and not necessarily these third-party devices that are going to be increasingly part of the ecosystem. So seeing the idea of the workplace expand and the new challenges that that's going to bring are something that people who work in these industries are going to be concerned with.
Perfect, thank you so much. So in terms of training students for these industries and some of the concerns that Drew had mentioned, things related to sort of the manufacturing sector and some of these smarter devices, what's at stake for the students that you're seeing come through your doors?
Well, I think if we take a look at where the job market is beginning to open today, first take a look at the population. We have the baby boomers are all starting to retire, and so now there's starting to be a gap of good experienced workers. And one of the problems is that the type of workers that we need are different. We need somebody who has the capability to understand how to use these machines, how to repair these machines, how to use the machines. And this level of skilled worker isn't there anymore. So there are huge opportunities coming up where we have local companies, we've got apprenticeship programs where they're looking for people. They're looking for young people. They're looking for people to get into these jobs, get these skills, get this education. There's plenty of the apprenticeship program that's run locally here in Alamance County. We have about 8 to 10 students right now. We're looking to try to get about 10 a year, but this is set up and run by the companies that are all involved in this, but they're having a problem with, well, I don't have a worker that can do this. I don't have a worker that can run this machine. I don't have a worker that understands how to do this computer task or whatever. So they look for the young people, and they're paying them to work and go to school at the same time, get the training that they need. I think the history of those kind of jobs are, oh, they're dirty, they're demanding, they don't pay very well. You know, nobody wants to do those kind of jobs. But somebody who's trained in mechatronics, the average salary early on is about $50,000 a year, which is really pretty good for that level. And when you have this lack of people, lack of training, you know, that's where the demand is, and people don't understand that these jobs are there. Also, the manufacturing places themselves are no longer that dirty. If you were to take a tour of some of the local businesses around here, and there's quite a few in Alamance County, you'll find, and I was amazed because I worked for 30 years in manufacturing, and our place was fairly clean because we made integrated circuits. But when you think about machining and stuff, you think about it being dirty. No, these places are clean, right? They're extremely clean. They're highly automated. So the difference in the job is totally different today than what it was 30, 40 years ago when manufacturing was at a height here. So now we have this drop in population, an increase in manufacturing, and a lack of people, and the opportunity is just waiting for students to jump into this.
Is there a barrier to entry to that? I'm kind of interested
No,
in
not
myself
really
now.
at
It
all.
sounds like a good thing to do.
I think the barrier to entry isn't, I guess what I call a physical barrier. There are so many opportunities for students to come in. There's opportunities if they can't afford a high pay, you know, a high cost school. No offense, Elon. But there's grants. The government has a lot of programs out there where they're going to fund people to come in. The companies themselves are funding people to get this training because they need the workers. Right? And when I have a student come into me and I say, you know, well, I'm interested in this, but you know, I'm not sure, you know, what I want to do. I said, well, let me ask you a question. I said, have you read the news recently, especially in the last 3 days? I said, did you see what McDonald's is doing? What's that? I said, well, they're automating the ordering. I said, they're getting rid of people and they're automating it. I said, guess what? McDonald's still needs somebody to maintain that automation. And so those are the kind of workers that we're going to need more and more of. That's where the gap is. That's where people should be looking for. And the barrier to that is very low. Right? There's all kinds of help and assistance to get into that kind of training. You know, I have plenty of high school students that once they find out about it, they're very interested. But I think getting the word out, one of the biggest things that I found out by working with the local companies is that students would have signed up for it, but they didn't find out about it. You know, why do they not see it? I don't know. We've been trying to get out there, advertise more, get the information out to the people, say, look, here are the kind of jobs that are coming up, here are the kind of jobs that are available, here's the training that you need to be able to get into these jobs. Right? I get emails from different companies all the time, said, hey, do you have any graduates? Our program is so new in mechatronics that we don't have a graduate yet, and yet I'm already getting requests for graduates. So the demand is there.
That's encouraging. I mean, in terms of the types of jobs that are out in the industry currently, a lot of the jobs that people hold are service industry jobs. There's overwhelming about almost 2/3 of people in the United States work in some sort of service industry. And so that fear of automation is justified, I think, in to a large degree. In terms of what you see from the regulatory side and the legal side of this coin, you know, what responsibility, if any, do companies have to their workers who are being displaced? And is there incentive for companies to get involved in job training or things of that nature?
There should be. I mean, it's not enough to just say we'll retrain truck drivers. I mean, truck driving is a very specific skill. This is going to be one of the areas that's incredibly affected. We need to break out of this what's been described as sort of the learning and working dichotomy. What's been described as we don't learn while we work, and we don't work while we learn. You go to school, you learn how to do something, maybe you have an internship or an externship, and then you go and do your job. And it's a scary idea to have to go back and relearn something. So training, teaching employees how to be resilient when these kinds of innovations are coming, and it's predictable that there's going to be this kind of disruption and the need to adapt to it. I think there absolutely is should be at least a moral obligation of companies to anticipate this and start teaching how to learn while you're working. And that might involve having learning taking up 20, 30, 40% of a job. But it's the only way that we're gonna keep these people employed and continue to see this kind of progress.
Right, because what I've been reading, and I've read a lot in the lead up to this. There's a saying that goes, "May you live in interesting times," and it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's one of those things, and I think we do live in interesting times here. And a lot of people are worried. Pew Research released a study just earlier this month that said nearly 75% of people are worried about losing their jobs to robots and automation eventually. And probably about 65% of those are worried that hiring is going to be automated as well, which I think is also an interesting ethical and sort of legal conundrum too. Have you seen anything from the side of automation from the human resources or sort of from the human factor side of things?
Sure. Yeah, whenever, one of the limits of artificial intelligence is that it's limited to making use of observable data, things that we are writing down, things that we are datafying, turning into data form, and there's often flaws in that data. If there is inequality in society, it's going to be reflected in that data, and if we blindly follow that data without being able to ask a machine learning system that's really operating in this kind of black box that we can't see inside, we don't know why it's necessarily spitting out what it is. If this is a third-party, HR type service that companies are looking at, do they understand what this data means, what it's telling them? Which is a scary thought if we're trying to continue to progress and trying to continue to break down barriers. And challenge prejudice and challenge bias. If all of that is reflected in the data that we're using, it risks perpetuating all of it instead of challenging it.
Very good, very good. So I would welcome those of you who are in the audience to come up to the microphones and please ask questions of the panelists. And don't be shy, because they are very kind gentlemen. I had a chance to talk to them.
Even though we're both lawyers. So.
Yeah. In terms of to Roland, mechatronics is such an interesting term. You called it a buzzword. Your specialization is in automation design. Can you tell us a little bit about what happens in automation design?
Well, if I look at history, right, when I first started working, I designed electronic controls for specialized manufacturing equipment. So, good example was, we called it a pick and place machine, where you pick up tiny little integrated circuits right after we had cut them out of a silicon wafer, and we arrange them on what we called a shipping magnet to send them off to somewhere else where they'd be used. Now, that machine could only be used to do that. Today, you want more flexible manufacturing from the standpoint, this is why robot arms are big. With robot arm, you can train it to do something, such as, say, pick something up, put it in another place, and then months later, and when you have to change your process, instead of having to create a whole new machine to do the new process, you just take the same machine, you make it do different motions, it remembers those, and now it does that automation. So that's why I call it flexible automation. Before it was fixed automation, right? Meaning that you designed the automation just to do that particular process. When that process was done, that automation was pretty much useless, unless you're going to do the exact same thing with the exact same size everything. Today, right, you have different machines. They are flexible. Okay, today we're building, I'll just say widget A. Tomorrow we have to build widget B. Different process, but I don't need a whole new machine. I can have a recipe, or in other words, a program, install that program, then it does process B instead of process A. And I don't have to change machines, so that saves a lot of money to the company, and they can make that product a lot cheaper.
Okay.
Right? And you still need people to maintain these things, you need people to train them. There's going to be displacement in different areas, but as brought up right at the beginning of the program, people still need jobs, and the companies know that, because if you displace everybody, who's going to buy your product? There won't be anybody left to buy your product, right? So you got to have some people in there. Sometimes I think automation goes a little bit too far. I could ask the audience, how many times have you made a phone call to some company and you get the automated answering machine? How many of you hate that thing? All right. You don't want to know what I yell into the phone, all right, other than give me a human, all right? Because even though the program itself that runs that is set up logically to answer the questions, I don't want to have to go through all that. If I talk to a human, I can cut through all that logic and say, this is what I want, all right? But right now it's fixed. Maybe someday when AI gets a whole lot smarter, they can have it, but I would still prefer a human for that.
Do you think that leads to distrust in terms of some of the more advanced types of things that are being done in medical diagnostics and things like that? I mean, if we can't get a phone to answer our 5 questions to get us to the right answer on the Spectrum helpline, then how are we going to trust a robot doctor to make the right call?
Well, there is, and you see resistance from some doctors, to stick with that example, because doctors will say there's just something about what I do. There's something about that human touch. There's something about being able to talk to a patient and understand them and understand what their needs are that a machine just can't do. No matter what the algorithm spits out, no matter what it says, even if it happens to be right, some if not most of the time, or better most of the time. Still, this is something that we want humans to do. Yeah, I think it does. It at least leads to skepticism. Mm-hmm. Which is why that could change. That could change in the coming years. As robots or artificial intelligence kind of creep into sectors like healthcare, and you have automation that's doing things that frees up doctors and frees up nurses to do those more human-centered tasks. That could change. That could change over time. But right now, yeah, there's skepticism. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question. I always want to sing. Anyway. So I had a question about the demographic makeup of the participants in your program, Roland, and then also how the demographic makeup affects the ethical part of what is, because you were saying that if bias is built into a machine, then the automated process is not actually fair. So, which you would think on paper it would be fair, but it might not be. So sort of who is interested in the program, gender, race and ethnicity, age, and then how does that affect sort of the outcome and the ethical aspects of it?
All right. At least based on my program and when I look at it, age-wise, I think there's a smooth spread, because I have older students and I have younger students. Of course, some of the industries are more interested in younger students but for multiple reasons. One is they want somebody who's gonna work longer, plus the programs that are set up through the federal government where they get the assisted funding for training and stuff are set up for the young student, all right? When they're set up for, I'll say, for the existing worker, then you get the older student. Where the big dichotomy is male versus female. And I don't see a difference in the male versus female worker, all right? To me, they're both the same, right? If you can do the job, it doesn't really matter, and anybody can do that job if they're trained right? So, you know, but I don't know if it's the interests of the individual people or what. I mean, we have several women in our program, and they're all very good, all right? And so, like I said, it makes no difference. If you want to go to the race aspect, there's no difference there either. We get a nice mixture of that as well. So I don't think that has any, you know, ethnicity of any kind really has anything to do with it. Although if you look at the program, you are going to see that it's heavily male-based. But I think that that comes from the history of manufacturing being heavily male-based throughout the years, and that, you know, if you watch the History Channel, only World War II made that change. You know, but I think it makes no difference. So.
Yeah, from you know, then actually to kind of segue to the other part of your question, it is important that we have a representative group designing these systems, because it is possible once you get into the data, it is possible to bake in biases of the creator, whether we know it or not. Both from how we're designing the algorithms that are doing the deciding and the analyzing, and the data itself, where we're getting this data from. To maybe give another example of a sector where I think this comes up a lot is the legal services sector, where there's a lot of potential in improving access to justice and you know, providing more self-help services thanks to advances in automation and AI. But you know, one of the big challenges from the legal standpoint is if you're a lawyer and you're trying to tell your client what the right move is here. You know, if you're looking historically, an algorithm might tell you something based on history, based on how things have played out. And that's not how law has progressed over time. Law has progressed by challenging what's happened before, by coming up with new ideas. So you know, we can look to the past and try to predict what's going to happen in the future based on the past, which is very helpful in healthcare when you're trying to diagnose. But there's no way to diagnose. There's no right and wrong diagnosis for a client's problem from a lawyer's perspective. That requires more. That requires understanding what's the change that you're trying to bring, or what's the wrong that you're trying to right. And that's something that we still need humans to do. So an over-reliance on data in that sense, and the biases that get baked into algorithms is a real challenge.
From an educational standpoint, I think I have an addition. I think one of the biases today is that everybody needs a 4-year degree, right? I don't believe that to be true, right? As I said, I see where the jobs are only because at the community college, I think the difference is that we try to teach our students, to give them the skill to have a trade of some kind. We want them that when they leave there, we want them to get into a job as quickly as possible. Or they're already in a job and we want them to have a better job. And I think that the stigma today is that, oh, I must have a 4-year degree, right? No, I think that the 2-year degree is more than viable. I mean, if you listen to people like Mike Rowe, he'll tell you, he'll show you, and you can see it, it's obvious. And if you're paying any attention to the type of jobs that are available, that's the kind of position that has the widest market. Now, does that mean that everybody gets a 2-year job? No, right? There's just a big opening coming, or actually exists today, for the people in these skilled areas, all right? And they need them. They need them today. Companies are asking for them. We can't continue manufacturing if we don't have those kind of skilled people, all right? We have to have them. And I personally believe that a viable economy cannot exist as a service economy alone. You have to, if I simplify it, I like to say, you have to make things, all right? You have to make things. You have to make things that people want. If you make things that people want and need, they will buy it, and you will have a viable business. And in order to make things, you got to have the skill to do it, knowledge of what to build. You know, hopefully that comes from the innovators out there as to what it is that people want and need. But you still have to have those skilled people in order to do it.
So I have a follow-up question to that, and after of course you ask your question. I want the questions from you, please.
So I have 3 questions.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
3 short questions.
So I heard you talking about students, and I came in a little late, so I may have missed this. But you know, I'm thinking about the 56-year-old guy that says, hey, you know, I've been working all my life. I've done everything I've been asked to do. I put a meal on the table of my family my whole life. I'm 56 years old, and you're telling me I got to go back to school now? What, are you kidding? You know? So, I mean, I can understand why there's a lot of anger out there because, so that's one question. So how do we get this message to folks who are being basically fed a line that there's some kind of simple answer to the changes that are occurring? I mean, they're winners and losers. And so, you know, when they're being fed, it's all about outsourcing, and we're going to bring all the jobs back from China when automation is moving into all of the factories. We're going to bring coal back when automation is moving into the mining industry. And it's just not true that they're being displaced for the simplistic reasons that they're being fed. And so naturally they're ticked off, but so how do we get to them a realistic answer about what they may need to do to improve their lives? Otherwise, we're just going to have a lot of really angry people out there. So that was kind of 1 and 2. So you want 3 or?
Well, let's start with 1 and 2, and then we'll see where we go.
I can start off on
Yeah,
it.
sure.
Right. My thought is, one of the things I think that if you look historically is that from 2 different areas. You went to college, you got a degree, you had a job, and you have that job until you retire. Or if you're a trades, you learn your trade, you have your trade, and you do your trade for many years until you retire. If you listen at the beginning, we talked about how things are changing, right? We have to better educate starting, I'm going to say, in the elementary school at that level to say, look, it isn't school, then work, and then retirement. It's initial training, working and learning, and then finally relaxing at the end. And the way I look at that is, I didn't go to law school until I was much older. All right, I was in my 40s when I went to law school, and I thought, man, it's been a lot of years since I went to school. What am I going to do? Well, you know, after a little while, it came back to me. You know, it was fine. But it's a stress on the family. It's just, I didn't have kids, so it was okay there, but it was a stress on my wife. And the one thing that I praised Capital Law School was they had an orientation for the spouses, which was, I thought, unusual, but helpful. But the point I'm trying to drive at is that we have to tell people, look, when you start to work, that isn't the end of education. Education and training has to be part of everything. I think you mentioned it earlier when you say 20% of your job should probably be to learn new things. I think we learn new things every day, right? I learned, you know, I learned as I did my job as well. I mean, I went to school for 4 years. I wasn't an instant engineer. I had I'll clean it up for the audience, all right? But I had a technician tell me, he says, oh, you engineers, you're no good till you've worked at least 7 years. What he was trying to tell me was that, hey, just because you went to school doesn't mean you learned everything. You got some new things to learn while you work, all right? And that part of learning never goes away. And it's a little bit different now because the technology is changing real fast. I taught a class at Piedmont, was Introduction to PCs. Now, I guess I was fortunate to come up to where when I first got out of college, PCs didn't even exist. All right, we had some microcomputers and things like that, but 1 or 2 years after I started working, there was no PC. We started off with VIC-20s and Commodore 64s for all of you who know what I'm talking about. But over the years, we learned how to do things. We build our own computers. Today, I got young kids, they know how to use all the programs. I crack open a case and their eyes roll in the back of their heads. Why? They've never seen the inside of a computer. Right? Now here's something that they've lived with since they were born, and they don't have a clue as to how it functions. So these are the kind of things where I think education needs to be changed, because we need to know how these things work. We need to keep on top of it. We need to keep a constant growth in that. I don't know if you have an answer or addition to that.
What do you do with the guy who's 56 years old today and angry?
Well, other than try to reason with them, I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I mean, I've had people that were older than that in some of my classes. All right. I don't think age is a barrier to learning. Right. And I tell them, I said, look, if they're a student of mine, right, if they're there, all right, I look at them and say, look, I went to school and worked a full-time job while I did it. I understand that you have issues. Right? I think our instructors have to be a little forgiving too, but here's what I tell my students. I said, I give you an assignment, I expect it to get done. Now, if you have some issues, we'll work with those issues. So education has to be a little bit flexible on that. Right? You have to learn how to work with the different students, because, well, hey, what if they get up and leave in the middle of your class? Why did they get up and leave with them in the middle of your class? Well, they just got a call on their cell phone that says they have to go to work because the machine is down. Do I say, well, you're going to fail this because you have to go to work? Or, if you leave here, I'm going to give you a 0 for this assignment? Well, then they're not going to want to be educated, right? Because they're getting punished for doing their normal tasks. So education has to be flexible as well. You have to deal with that, right? You have to allow them to work at other times. You have to allow them to maybe have different deadlines, but still get the education in the long run, right? And the person who's overly angry and says, look, I don't want to learn at all, I don't know what to do with that person. If they're open to learning, I think that there's an opportunity for them. All right, but if they're not open, then I don't know what to do with them.
Instead, I'll add just one thing. I think there are probably some people where it's just a really tough sell, and part of it might be the stigma associated with someone who has a four-year degree, and they don't like the idea of having to go back and get a 2-year degree because they've been there and done that. And I think short of national priorities that recognize that for some people, when you get to that point and they're out of work and the only option is to go back to school, it might be too late for them. They just might not buy into that type of path. That's why I think it's exactly right. If there can be part-time programs, if there can be ways to start the learning before you get to that point where you've already lost your job, and the education is then out of desperation, if it can be part of your career, if it can be an extension of your career as opposed to a replacement of it, I think we need national priorities that recognize that and have that messaging before it's too late.
So I'll reference again the Pew Research study. There's a question that asked about widespread automation and the impact on future career opportunities. And Americans are worried that widespread automation will lead to more inequality and leave people adrift in their lives. And it sounds like that's some of the concern that you're voicing here with your question. Roughly 3/4 of Americans expect that widespread automation of jobs will lead to greater levels of economic inequality rather than less levels, right? So if there's more inequality based on the amount of automation, people will have a hard time finding jobs. Now, some of the suggestions from the economic standpoint, when Tony was presenting about the types of leisurely jobs that we can have, the jobs of going into a virtual world and pretending like we have a job, that doesn't exactly sound like something that's sustainable, but it certainly sounds like a lot of fun. Maybe. Maybe it doesn't sound like a lot of fun to a lot of people. It sounds fun in the short term to me. So, in terms of that, lead us forward. Like, what from a national level, you mentioned the national scope of things, what from a national level could be done to help to bridge this gap between sort of the people who are economically unstable to the point where they have to go back to school and they have to put things on the line, taking out a large amount of loans, putting their families into disarray for even the short term when there's not a guarantee that that's going to pay dividends in the long term.
Yeah, this problem was actually identified back in the 1980s. Actually, Shoshanna Tsubasa was for years a researcher at the Harvard Business School, and she recognized in 1988 she coined a phrase called informating. So she drew a distinction back then even of the difference between automation and informating, automating and informating. And recognize that once you go beyond just automating something that does something, that one machine, it does one thing and you get a result, once you have information from that automation and you start using that to fine-tune the automation and to learn about whatever process you're doing in your industry, that information is really powerful. And what an organization or an industry decides to do with that information, I think will decide which path we go down. Are we going down a path that's going to increase inequality or fight it? And a lot of that is going to be decided within our organizations. She says if you informate up, if you take that information, it's only used at the top of an organization. It's only used to surveil your employees or to make decisions without including the rest of the organization. That sort of informating up, sending the information to the top of the organization, is going to lead to that kind of inequality, not only within the organization, but more broadly within society. She says back in the 80s, as early, she said if you informate down, if that information becomes a part of the organization, larger, if it becomes part of society, then you can actually do some really great things. If we can have national priorities that incentivize within particular industries that informating down, that using that information to help as opposed to oppress, that's the only way. That's the only way to move forward in a way that leads to the kind of results that we want.
Okay.
I was going to say, I think as time moves on, there's natural changes that occur, and some people will see the natural changes and other people won't. It reminds me of I can't remember the name of the movie I saw, but I remember it had Danny DeVito in it, and he was like this really nasty person going in to close a manufacturing facility, and the line in the movie reminded me. He says, you can make the best darn buggy whip in the world, but if nobody wants any buggy whips, it's not going to do you any good. And the point of the line is that as time moves forward, things change. and you have to change and move with it. If you decide to stick doing the same thing forever, eventually you're going to outdate yourself and you will have no customers because there'll be no demand for what it is that you're either doing or making. So from that point of view, as time moves on, things have to change. Just look in the past 40 or 50 years, we went from heavily manufacturing to more service, and now I think manufacturing is going to come back a bit. Because like I said, I think that in order to have a viable economy, you have to have a combination of service and making things, right? If you don't have anything to sell other than service, when the economy goes down, you're going to be the first ones cut, right? Because I can always do without service. Now, that doesn't mean I can always do without certain things, right? I can't do without food, water, things like that, right? So from that aspect, those kind of things will always be around. But if you look forward, you see how things are changing, you change yourself to go with it. The problem today is the pace is a lot faster, where in other years you might live your whole life and not have to worry about the change. I mean, you go back 200 years, 300 years, not only did you not have to change, but maybe your children didn't have to change, their children didn't have to change. You could have the same family business for 100 years because society as a whole barely changed, or technology as a whole wasn't at the pace that it's at today. So that is one of the things that I think everybody needs to be aware of, is that things change and you just have to stay on top of it.
Okay, very good. Well, I'd like to thank our panel once again. If you could also thank them with me. Very good.